Order. I call on Luke Murphy to move the motion.
Thank you. I beg to move that the House considers SEND provision in Hampshire. It's a pleasure to lead my first Westminster Hall debate under your chairship, Sir Mark, and in particular on this really important topic of SEND need in Hampshire. And I'd like to begin by recognising the parents, advocates and campaigners who have brought this issue into the public eye, especially the Kids Nursery Parent Committee from Basingstoke who have joined us here today. Their dedication to advocating for inclusion and calling for urgent reforms to the SEND system is both inspiring, and their personal stories highlight the real impacts of this crisis on children, young people and their families. When I first stood as Labour's candidate for Basingstoke, I knew that SEND support was facing challenges. But it wasn't until I met families across Basingstoke that I truly understood the depth of the crisis. I spoke to two mothers on the campaign who lived just 2 doors apart, yet both felt alone in their struggles with an adversarial and confusing system. They had no idea that their situations were nearly identical, both battling to secure essential support for their children, believing they were alone in that fight. A mother in my constituency, Michelle, perfectly summarised the struggle. She told me that raising children with SEND is incredibly challenging, exhausting and stressful. There isn't enough support for parents to cope. We face constant appointments, endless form filling and have to fight for the education our kids deserve. It shouldn't be this hard, and it doesn't need to be this hard. No family should be placed in Michelle's position, having to fight tooth and nail for a fair, inclusive education for their children. Just last week, the National Audit Office issued a report described by the Minister for School Standards as a damning indictment of the SEND system. This report highlighted that the system is not only financially unsustainable, but is also failing to deliver the necessary outcomes for children. It is a broken system, a crisis we inherited after 14 years of inaction. And it is heartening to know, looking around this room, that the sentiment is shared across party lines. The last Conservative Education Secretary labelled the system she left behind as lose, 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 while current Tory shadow ministers say they did not do enough on SEND and should hang their heads in shame. We do agree. The NAO report underscores the reality that families and councils live with every day. The demand for SEND support has surged. Education, health and care plans have increased by 140% since 2014, with over 576,000 individuals now needing this support. Local authorities are also struggling under a £4.6 billion deficit as high needs funding, even at £10.7 billion, fails to meet demand. Tribunal appeals have risen by 334%, a testament to a system where families must fight for basic rights rather than being supported in achieving them. One parent shared her story with me recently. After waiting 2.5 years following an initial needs assessment, her daughter finally secured a placement in a specialist school, but it's a 70-minute round trip for only 2 hours of schooling each day. This family's experience reflects a system that feels combative rather than supportive, where councils, as this mum pointed out, spend public funds on solicitors and barristers to deny or delay access to services that their children are legally entitled to. The impact of this crisis on families is stark. Nationally, only 50% of EHC plans met the statutory 20-week timeline in 2023, down from 60% in previous years. This failure in meeting deadlines has left parents understandably losing faith in the system. It is little wonder that parents of children with SEND are significantly more likely to consider homeschooling than parents of children without SEND, a sad consequence of a system that is failing them.
Would the honourable member give way?
I will give way.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the honourable member for Basingstoke for securing this debate, and thank you, Sir Mark, for your chairmanship. I'd also like to thank the parents that you've brought along today to support you in this debate. I have exactly the same situation in my constituency in Redditch and Worcestershire, and if it wasn't for parents like this, who we have dotted around the country fighting for their children or grandchildren, we would not have had such energy within the new chamber to fight for the proper solutions for SEND moving forward. And you talked about trust, you talked about a broken system. And do you agree with me that it's essential that if we are to rebuild a system that's fit for purpose, we have to rebuild trust between local authorities and parents and grandparents so co-production can truly start again?
I thank the honourable member for his contribution and intervention, and I completely agree. I think crucial to this, fixing this system, will be about rebuilding trust between parents, national government and local authorities as well. And I think there is much work to do. And I do think what the budget showed yesterday, that this government is making a down payment on that commitment as well. And I know that there will be more to come. And as the honourable member mentioned, the lack of adequate support has lasting impacts on families. Many parents have had to reduce their work hours or even leave employment entirely to care for their children when the local authority fails to provide adequate support. I know from hearing their stories that many families are reaching breaking point and parents are exhausted from the constant battle against the system. Turning to Hampshire, the county council of my area, like many others, has been coping with a system in freefall. The number of EHC plans in Hampshire is nearly doubled, from just over 8,000 in 2019 to around 16,000 this year. Hampshire's cumulative deficit for the dedicated schools grant is now at 86.1 million, representing 9.4% of its total dedicated schools grant income. To put this in perspective, for every £100 that Hampshire receives for schools and SEND provision, it has accumulated nearly £9.40 in debt. This deficit is expected to reach 250 million by 2025-26 if nothing changes. Hampshire also currently spends 47.2 million annually on independent school placements due to the lack of available spaces in state-funded options, underscoring the urgent need for expanded state provision and the need to support mainstream settings in providing essential SEND support. I'm particularly concerned about the expiration of the statutory override in 2026, which currently allows these education deficits to be kept off council balance sheets. When this override ends, councils like Hampshire could face financial insolvency, forcing them to declare a Section 114 notice and request government intervention. This situation is clearly untenable, and serious reforms are urgently needed. But this crisis isn't just about budgets or statistics. It is about real lives and real families. Eleanor, a mother in my constituency of Basingstoke, told me about her son. When he turned 2, she sent him to the local nursery to be with his older sister. But there it quickly became clear that his development was delayed. On multiple occasions, Eleanor would come to pick him up and find him playing alone in the toilets, unsupervised. Quite understandably, this is not what she wanted for her son. But without sufficient support from early years education, and because he couldn't talk, he was left to blend into the background and slip through the cracks. Eleanor describes the process of fighting for SEND provision as just terrible, a constant battle with the local authority in a system that she describes as completely broken. Another parent, Kelly, shared her story with me. After multiple appointments where she raised concerns about her son's development, she was told that he was simply the lazy twin. But Kelly didn't give up. She described, however, that without clear guidance and support, parents go into the SEND system blindfolded, feeling their way through a complex maze that should otherwise be straightforward. Jodie, another mother from Basingstoke, told me that the only support you get consistently through the whole SEND journey is from other parents who are going through the same thing. I think it's a sad reflection, Chair, of the system when parents find their only reliable support is each other. And I know that my colleague Alex Baker, the member for the Aldershot constituency who wanted to be here today, has had similar experiences, where the lack of suitable school places has left parents with no option but homeschooling for their children. This is putting unacceptable pressure on parents, resulting in mental health issues and self-harm, while children miss out on vital opportunities to develop wider life and social skills. A parent in my constituency described the impact of finally receiving a specialist provision for her daughter as having a halo effect. It brought a sense of normalcy and confidence back to her daughter's life, sparking interests outside of the classroom. But this positive impact should not just be the rare exception, it should be the standard experience for every family navigating the SEND system. When I committed to a manifesto focused on building a truly inclusive, responsive and supportive education system, it wasn't just a pledge, it was a mission. Every child deserves an education system that meets their needs, especially those with special educational needs and disabilities. And I am encouraged by this government's actions in taking the first steps towards real change. Yesterday's budget marked a significant commitment from the Chancellor with a £1 billion increase in SEND and alternative provision funding, a 6% real terms boost. This funding is a critical step toward improving outcomes for children and families while guiding our SEND system towards much needed financial stability. Fixing the foundations to ensure that every child in England can achieve and thrive regardless of their background. The Children's Wellbeing Bill, announced in the King's Speech, mandates schools to collaborate with local authorities to improve SEND inclusion, and that is a foundational step. And our commitment to expanding early years support, investing in SEND-specific teacher training, and establishing a framework for early intervention, such as the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, all part of a larger strategy to prevent children from slipping through the cracks as soon as possible. The Government has also said it will ensure accountability in mainstream settings through bodies like Ofsted to guarantee that every school is equipped to meet the needs of students with SEND. And more widely, the Government has committed to recruiting 6,500 new teachers to reduce class sizes, which I hope will also allow for more inclusive classrooms. This crisis has stretched far too long, and we must work cross-party to address it before it becomes truly unsalvageable. Every child, no matter if they have SEND or not, should have the support in place so that they can thrive in school and beyond. Today, with the Kids Parent Committee from Basingstoke and the Minister present, I wanted to amplify a clear message from families in my constituency. We need greater training and support for mainstream early years staff on SEND. Early intervention is crucial. By equipping early years staff with the skills to recognise and support additional needs, we can ensure children receive timely help, giving both parents and children a solid foundation. I fully support this goal and will work alongside them to make it a reality. In yesterday's budget, the Chancellor announced an additional £1.8 billion to expand government-funded childcare and allocate £69 million to grow the network of family hubs. This funding represents a chance to provide essential support and early intervention for SEND families across the country. I hope this debate shines a light on the reality of SEND provision, not only for families in Hampshire, but across the country. Today, I urge the Minister and colleagues from all parties to urgently support a reformed SEND system that lifts up our young people and their families. The Government has rightly committed to breaking down barriers to opportunity for all, and this must include children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. We know there is no magic wand that can fix this broken system overnight, but I urge the Minister to collaborate with their colleagues across government to urgently reform the SEND system so that we can restore faith in SEND provision, and I'm hopeful that this government will lead the way in creating a system that truly works for every young person, every family and every community. As Michelle put it, it shouldn't be this hard, and it doesn't need to be this hard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in this debate? The question is that this House has considered SEND provision in Hampshire. I call Jim Shannon.
Sir Mark, first of all, can I thank you for calling me to speak, and also a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I spoke to the honourable gentleman, the honourable member for Basingstoke, on the way down here. We walked down together to the hall, and I asked him, was he speaking in Westminster Hall, and he said he was. So I know this is about Hampshire, this debate. I always wish to come along and support honourable members who are bringing forward issues that are critically important. Now, this debate might be focused upon Hampshire, but I want to add the comments of a Northern Ireland perspective. I'm very pleased to see the Minister in place. I always look forward to meeting the Minister. I know that she very clearly understands the issues that the Honourable Gentleman has requested. And I want to give the story as well, but I want to support the Honourable Member and also his parent group that have come along here. And he mentioned them on the way down when we were walking down the gallery. He mentioned that they're the reason you've asked for the debate, and so they should be in everything that we do. It's about our constituents. It's about what we can do to help them and give a perspective. I spoke in relation to this issue just last week, and indeed have spoken on this issue, I think, like almost everyone here, and every debate there's been on SEN education since we came back after the election. So I want to give an Northern Ireland perspective to the matter, if I can do that. I very much welcome the budget, by the way, Sir Mark. The budget allocated extra, and the Honourable Member has referred to it, extra money to the SEN education system. And I'm always hopeful, Sir Mark, that through those allocations of monies, that some of that will come our way through the Barnett consequential. The result is that then we gain from investment here in the mainland as well. Sir Mark, there's no doubt that...
Order. The debate pertains to Hampshire, and whilst there are obviously issues that you're raising that are common, the subject is particularly aimed in the Hampshire direction, Mr. Shannon. So I'd be grateful if you could perhaps bring your remarks, make the main points, and try not to veer off the subject in terms of specifics in your own part of the UK.
Sir Mark, I'll make sure whenever I mention Northern Ireland, I mention Hampshire as well, and that should hopefully keep the perspective right. Because what the Honourable Gentleman for Basingstoke has put forward as happening in Hampshire is happening in my constituency as well. Now, I want to illustrate that, and thereby illustrating and put forward some suggestions on how we can better help in the system. And what we're doing back home in Northern Ireland can help those in Hampshire in the way that they're moving forward. We've had a very clear teacher funding issue, especially in the SEN sector. So whenever we come to asking the Minister some questions which are helpful for the Member for Basingstoke and hopefully helpful for this debate, what's been done to ensure that there are more adequately trained people to respond to the issue. And why, Sir Mark, I want to speak in this debate as well is because it's a personal one. I have 6 grandchildren. 3 of them unfortunately have some difficulties with autism, some difficulties with learning and speech therapy. I'm not going to mention their names because that would be inappropriate to do so. But that's why it's personal. So whenever I come here to make a contribution, Sir Mark, for me it's very clear what we're asking for. I'm asking for the same thing back home that I've already done. But I want to give a couple of examples of how things have happened, and by doing so, what has made it better. And I know the Honourable Gentleman has referred to that. I spoke to a teaching assistant back home, and she told me that she did a level 3 qualification in specialist support for teaching and learning in schools. If she lived here in England, she would fully qualify as a substitute teacher. However, in Northern Ireland, further training is necessary. Again, an example for us back home. The same system here, you qualify. The system back home, we don't. I think it very clearly highlights the issue. There's across Northern Ireland, similar to what's happening in Basingstoke and in Hampshire, I'm convinced of, from listening to the Honourable Gentleman's contribution, the autism assessments, some 66,000 pupils back home have some form of SEN, some 20% of the population. Figures are similar to what the Honourable Gentleman has referred to as well. So children are fighting from the day they enter school for diagnosis. But unfortunately, there are detrimental educational psychology delays, which also coincide with our health service. So I think when the Minister is responding, while we're focusing upon SEN and education, there has to be a very tight relationship between education and health, because that's important that we have that. Again, the Minister hopefully will respond in a very positive fashion. As I said earlier on, while the issue is very much a personal one, 6 grandchildren, 3 of them unfortunately with autism and speech therapy. But I want to give you an example of what happened. Now, I mentioned there diagnosis. Wow, get the diagnosis done early and you can change a child's life. And I'm going to give you an example of that if I can, a personal one, because it's what happened in our family. One of the boys, one of the grandchildren, was quite boisterous. He seemed to have difficulty expressing himself by a speech. The result of all that was that when he was at nursery and early school, unfortunately he was heading out at other children and became quite a difficult child. Not anybody's fault, but just because he wasn't able to express himself in the way that he wished to do so. Now we got the early diagnosis, and with the early diagnosis came the speech therapy, and with the speech therapy came an absolute change in that wee boy. From the wee boy, I remember we went to my son and their house the Christmas, and I said to my wife, I said, Sandra, there'll be some goings on the day when we get there. And she says, you'll see a difference. And I hadn't seen him for a while. But the difference in that wee boy, because he got the diagnosis, he got the speech therapy, you couldn't have kept him quiet. What a change in a wee boy, because the system worked and helped that wee fella. So I want to make that as an example, Sir Mark, of what can happen if the right strategy and the right way forward is taken. Now, the opposite now, of course, of the wee boy is that he never keeps quiet. Which, you know, is it lovely to have a wee boy in the corner who's so boisterous and alive and respectful? And we heard so many pleases and thank yous. Such a difference in the system when it works. Now we have two other ones coming through, and early diagnosis has to be the same for them. The Honourable Gentleman for Basingstoke has asked for that, and I'm sure the Minister will respond. Again, another example of how education can help. An example to help the Minister, because I think the great advantage of these debates, Sir Mark, are that we can give examples of where things have been going the right way, and thereby exchange ideas and ways forward, and how we can do it better. The Villa High School in my constituency, they increased their enrolment from 401 to 600 because the Education Authority has enabled the school to extend the special provision for pupils with autism to include a 10 and 11-year-olds. And they've established what is called nurture classes. It's it's not a novel idea, Sir Mark, but it's a good idea to help move forward for education and mainstream education in particular. So those are just two of the points I want to make: early diagnosis and the nurture classes that we've done in my constituency of Strangford, where I don't know what it is, Sir Mark, but certainly I've seen more children in this last number of years, last 10 years, 15 years in particular, who have difficulties with autism and other issues. In conclusion, Sir Mark, there's more that should be done to create specialist nurture units within mainstream schools and support specialist training for teachers of all ages. There must be capacity to do our best for those pupils who do require additional support, and they should not have to suffer due to a funding crisis. So I look forward very much to hearing what the Minister's thoughts are, and indeed the Shadow Minister as well. Around this room today we have people with incredible knowledge, and I look forward to all their contributions. And hopefully the Minister can undertake further discussion with the devolved nations in relation to this. I said it earlier on, I mean it, it's honest truth in any debates that I come to. There are always lessons that can be learned regionally, and we can then share them in this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That benefit that comes from regional knowledge, which may be specific, but which can help us all to do things better. With that, I commend the Honourable Gentleman for Basingstoke for bringing it forward. Hope my contributions, Sir Mark, kept exactly to the lineage that you asked me to do. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Shannon. I call Darren Paffey.
Thank you, Sir Mark. And it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I believe, I'm still learning this, but I may need to refer to my register of interest as a member of the Education Select Committee. But I want to start by thanking my honourable friend, the member for my childhood home of Basingstoke. for securing this important debate for our county. I fully recognise the picture that he has so comprehensively and eloquently set out today. And as a former Cabinet Member for Education in Southampton and as a proud dad to an amazing SEND child, it's both my professional and my personal experience that moves me to take part today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so, representing the people of Southampton Itchen. I did move further south in the county a few years ago. Now, this debate could not have come at a better time. Not only is the need for reform in SEND at its greatest after being overlooked by the Conservative government for 14 years, but it comes following yesterday's budget, which my honourable friend has referenced, with announcements of £1 billion of extra funding to be allocated to SEND. I don't intend to repeat the points that he has already made, but I do just take this opportunity to share 3 reflections from my experience that hopefully contribute to a way forward for SEND children and their families in Southampton and across the county. I want to start by saying as clearly as I can that inclusion in mainstream schools is the right approach for many. But the metrics around schools must change. I can tell you what inclusion is not. It is not just having a child with SEND in a mainstream classroom and then it's job done. It's not just a box to tick, it's not just a target to meet. It is a fundamental shift in how we think about education and how we define not only a school success, but far more importantly, how each child has the opportunities opened up to them that they deserve. So our current metrics of Attainment 8 and Progress 8 often fall short in recognising a school's full achievements. In Southampton Itchen, as I'm sure in other parts of the county, we've seen promising improvements in school performance, and schools are making remarkable strides towards that inclusivity. But the performance metrics often don't reflect that. Teachers are working incredibly hard to meet the needs of students with special educational needs and disabilities, tailoring their classroom approach to ensure that these students, as part of their learning journey, are not left behind. And yet those efforts, that dedication, the adaptability and that commitment to inclusivity of our teaching staff are not somehow considered a measure of a school's success. I want to argue that they absolutely are and should be. So in our very welcome Ofsted reforms, would the Minister consider how we might ensure that inclusive practices that open up those opportunities for SEND children count towards these new report cards, not just statistics, and so that we can expand measures from just academic achievement to educational practice that makes the difference to whether SEND children have that opportunity that they need and deserve. My second point is related to the National Audit Office report that my honourable friend also mentioned. 1.7 million young people are identified as having special educational needs and disabilities in UK schools. But that report also notes that since 2019 there have been no consistent improvements in outcomes for those children and young people. That is a huge swathe of our children, our future, that cannot, should not and must not be left behind. In Southampton Itchen, the rate of growth of the number of children with SEND is outpacing the national average. And dealing with this increased need inclusively in mainstream schools relies on adequate teacher training and their preparedness for future trends. And yet, the current national standards require teacher trainees to spend just 1 day of their placement in a SEND setting. Contrast that with what they face in the mainstream classroom, where 1 in 5 school pupils in England have identified special needs. There needs to be much more attention to the needs of those children and much more preparation in the teacher's professional development. So when the professional evidence is that when you get the inclusive approach right, then the benefit is not just felt in those outcomes for SEND children, but by all children. So will the Minister consider revising the initial teacher training framework so that all new teachers coming to Hampshire and other parts of the country will have received training that reflects how they can best support and draw out the best and provide the greatest strides forward for those who will be in their care in the classroom. We need to ensure that teachers' needs for that comprehensive training and support are met to empower them to meet pupils' needs. And finally, no discussion of this can avoid money completely. Resourcing has been a key issue in recent years. In particular, independent SEND provision is growing. And while we recognise that those places are needed, what it means is that councils are at the mercy of market prices set by market providers. Now, again, no one in their right mind would deny those children that provision that they need. But the reality is that this puts a significant strain on council budgets dedicated to SEND children. So yesterday's announcement of £1 billion in extra funding is a welcome and much needed step. But if we're to make the most of this investment, we need to ensure that it supports both state-funded special schools and mainstream schools with those inclusive practices so that every child can make the strides that they need and deserve and get the support that is due. We're not necessarily just talking about more money, however, but what schools in my constituency tell me is that they need certainty about what will happen with the proposed national funding formula and top-ups. So I'd be grateful if the Minister could give a timeline of when we can expect that certainty to come. And related to this, could she also confirm what will happen with the statutory override for the dedicated schools grants? I close by saying that we must get this right. If this Labour government is to achieve our mission of breaking down the barriers to education, an opportunity that too many SEND children continue to face. I'm aware of the scale of this challenge, and no one is more aware of the scale of that challenge than the families here represented. But it is my belief that this government will deliver the change that people from families like those here today and those in my constituency who are seeking support for their children with SEND are long overdue.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further backbench contributions, I'll move on to the front bench and I'll call Alex Brewer from the Lib Dems.
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Member for Basingstoke for bringing this debate forward, and thank you, Sir Mark. It is a pleasure to have you chair this debate. In North East Hampshire, as in many other places, special educational needs and disability is an area that comes up repeatedly in casework, in constituency surgeries and local council meetings. The system, frankly, is broken, and I welcome the Honourable Member for Basingstoke's calls to work cross-party on a solution. Children are frequently not getting the support that they need. Schools don't have the funding for further provisions, and Hampshire County Council is running at an £86 million deficit, trying to meet this need. The people who suffer as a result of this are the children and their families, despite the hard work of head teachers, teaching assistants and parents. I have been meeting with constituents to talk about these challenges, meeting with charities in the local area who support families, and talking through the concerns with local councillors. And I would like to pay tribute to all of those who are supporting our children with additional needs, despite the complexity of the system as it currently stands. Raising a child with additional needs is hard. We cannot deny there is an additional parenting burden, although parents, of course, give it willingly. But there is also an additional administrative burden, and council budgets are squeezed so hard they can't meet the needs. The number of parents who have to make appeals on SEND support has more than trebled since 2014. When provision is scarce and parents have to fight for it, it becomes an exhausting battle just to have child's needs met. The increasingly cited narrative that pushy parents are just trying to get a bit of extra help for their child is shown to be utterly nonsensical in view of just how much work it is to ensure even the most basic of provision. North East Hampshire is a beautiful place to live, but as a largely rural area with many small villages, hundreds of children have to travel to their nearest school. For those families who live a long way from their nearest suitable provision, not only do they have to deal with the stresses of the system, the exclusion, lack of academic progression, high levels of anxiety and opaqueness of the process, they also have to deal with transport. With a severe lack of public transport options available, this is frequently in the form of private taxis. According to the Department for Education, the net planned expenditure on SEND transport for 24-25 financial year in Hampshire is £56,795,000. And yet I hear time and again from my constituents about the failure to secure transport in time for the start of the school year. This lack of a secure transport route can have a huge impact on a child's relationship to school and their real and perceived safety. It also increases the pressure on working parents who frequently must leave their work or reduce their hours due to the lack of accommodation of their child's needs. The results? A postcode lottery for accessing support. One of my constituents had SEND transport approved in June. We are now on the last day of October and they have not received any further information. That's 2 months of the school year missed. This is not good enough, and the situation is not unique to my constituency. Another child in North East Hampshire has been told to use a bus stop a mile away from her home. But because of her disability, she and her parents are understandably anxious about the safety of this journey each morning, given the challenges and dangers for her crossing roads. Prior to being elected this year, I was chief executive of a charity that supports children and young people with Down syndrome and their families. I saw firsthand what they must grapple with when it comes to securing the right education support for their child. One of the services provided by this charity is specialist support throughout a child's education, a service which used to be provided by many county councils across the UK. It is charities, therefore, which are often left to pick up the pieces. I recently met with Special Needs Jungle, which analyses the sector, provides recommendations and supports families. The Hampshire Parent Carer Network is also a helpful source of support and information. But these organisations can't find additional services out of thin air. In the budget yesterday, the Chancellor stated that she wants to improve outcomes for our most vulnerable children, but also announced that VAT will be charged on private schools. This is highly concerning for North East Hampshire, where we have at least 4 independent schools, each with explicit provision for SEND pupils, and state schools which are not only full, but telling us quite clearly that they can't meet the needs of many children with additional needs under current funding models. There is, of course, a budgetary disincentive to including children with additional needs in mainstream schools, which the Liberal Democrats have said we would halve. The £1 billion uplift in funding for SEND announcement in the budget yesterday is welcome, but we must go further to clean up this mess. This is a system that needs complete overhaul, not just an increase in funding. We need to undo the damage inflicted on our wider education system by the previous Conservative government. We need to ensure that early help is restored to help children develop the tools to navigate the school system as early in their lives as possible. We need to rebuild play into our early years programme and dispense with testing at age 5. We need to build outdoor learning into our core curriculum and much more besides. One school in my constituency is building a new room. This room is not for teaching. It isn't a classroom. It's a welcome room where children who are refusing to come to school can come and feel safe and secure and welcome. It is a bridge between school refusal and school acceptance, and it's a great idea, but it should not be needed. SEND provision must be flexible, tailored and suitable for all communities, both urban and rural, and most of all, it must be available, and that includes the transport required to get to the school gate. I close with a sentiment from an assistant head teacher in North East Hampshire. Parents and families shouldn't have to fight against the systems that are meant to be helping their children.
Thank you. I now move to the spokesperson for the official opposition, James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Sir Mark, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Again, I congratulate the Honourable Member for Basingstoke for securing his first debate in Westminster Hall on such an important topic for children and parents in Hampshire, and it's good to see a number of them in the gallery today to listen to the debate. And it's the third such debate on this topic which I've taken part on since the election. I think that just represents the importance of this issue to members beyond Hampshire and across the whole of the country, and indeed in Northern Ireland, who all can see the challenges and the demands facing the sector. And those problems are familiar to us all. It's been mentioned already. The National Audit Office report last week into support for children and young people with SEND highlighted the 140% increase that there's been in the number of children with education and healthcare plans since 2015, and a 93% increase in Hampshire since 2019 alone. As has been mentioned, overall, half of those plans are not delivered within the 20-week timeframe, although in Hampshire I think around 3/4 are issued on time, which is something that my own county of Norfolk could aspire to get to. And the NAO also recognised the significant increase in high needs funding to £10.7 billion, which was put in place by the last government. But the demand continues to grow, and there are still big deficits in local authorities that need to be addressed. So that report highlighted the need for whole system reform and an integrated approach to improve the outcomes, which has rightly been mentioned, and the financial sustainability indeed, of funding. And it recommended research to understand the root causes driving the increases in SEND and demand for EHC plans. And I know that the department is funding some work, I think through the University of Newcastle and others, to look into those such issues, as well as action to put the budgets of local authorities onto a sustainable footing. And I was a member of the Public Accounts Committee a few years ago where we had another NAO report which looked at the SEND system, identified similar problems. And the report that we as a committee put forward helped inform the SEND and AP improvement plan which the last government came forward with, because we all recognise, we all accept there needs to be reform of this system. It is not working at the moment. And first of all, we need to have a national framework and standards to address the inconsistent support across the country. And the previous government's plan did set out a blueprint for a unified system for SEND and AP driven by new national standards. And the first area we were going to bring forward was around speech and language therapy. And in a written answer to me, the Minister confirmed that that's something that the government is still considering doing, which we welcome. And the Honourable Member for Strangford referred to the powerful impact that early diagnosis and access to speech and language therapy can have. And it's great to hear stories like that, and they should be far more often told. And we also need to improve the EHCP process, because as the Honourable Member for Basingstoke's constituent said, it shouldn't be this hard. And as constituency MPs, we see families who've had to battle and we help them to get through the system, but they shouldn't have to come to us in order to do that. So our plan also committed to improving the timeliness of those plans through a standardised and digitised approach. And I would like to know from the Minister whether the government is going to be proceeding with those proposals as well. And the second area where we need reform, and again I think there is a lot of consensus here, is around building capacity and expertise in the mainstream schools and focus on early help. And as I said in the House last week in the urgent question, we wholeheartedly support the focus on inclusivity, which means improving skills and training in the SEND workforce with a particular emphasis on early intervention, and sharing the real expertise that there is in the specialist schools with those working in the mainstream settings. I've referred in previous debates where I've been to specialist schools, and the teachers there are desperate to get into state schools, into mainstream schools, and talk about the activities and the expertise they have to support children with those needs in a mainstream setting. However, some people do clearly need specialist school support, and I understand Hampshire has been expanding such provision with 3 new schools, including one that was approved, I think, shortly before the election, which I hope the Minister will confirm is not part of the review of free schools that has been put in place, but will be proceeding and will be funded. And Hampshire is one of the counties, like my own of Norfolk, which spends a huge amount of money on transporting children to school for specialist provision. And the honourable gentleman for Basingstoke referred to the impact that has on children being stuck in taxis or buses travelling long distances for learning. And the honourable member for North East Hampshire also talked about the impact that has on parents in terms of their ability to work, and also, importantly, the safety of children getting to bus stops far from their home. And the third area where we need to focus is around partnerships between education and health groups working together to lead the change. The NAO said the current system has misaligned incentives, accountabilities and priorities across the system, which creates challenges in having a whole system approach. So collaboration between the key partners is very important, and the last government proposed bringing forward measures for SEND and AP partnerships, and we look forward to the Children and Wellbeing Bill and scrutinising the proposals that look to achieve the same outcome. But the question is, we all really want to see a bit more leg from the government about what their plan is for reform and for inclusivity. We know that the SEND team within the department has been moved into the schools unit to help bring greater focus, which sounds perfectly sensible. And in yesterday's budget, has been referred to an additional £1 billion for SEND and AP funding. An additional funding for SEND is needed and is welcome. But I suspect that honourable members and families listening to the budget would expect this to be used to provide additional support to their children and the inclusive practices which the honourable member for Southampton Hitchin referred to. However, can the Minister confirm the government actually expects £865 million of that £1 billion to be used by local authorities to reduce their deficits in SEND? Clearly, financial sustainability and addressing deficits, including the statutory override, which a number of members have referred to and which I've referred to in every other debate that we've had here, is very important. But we should be clear about where the extra £1 billion of funding is going and what we're actually going to see on the ground as a result. And beyond funding, the Minister has regularly said we need significant change, but despite last week's urgent question, we're still lacking clarity on what that change looks like. Although one thing the Minister did say in response to that was that the government will be looking at any legislation that needs to be amended or brought in to achieve our vision for an inclusive mainstream education. Can the Minister confirm she's referring to the 2014 Act there, which established EHCPs? And what is her time frame for potentially reviewing that legislation? Is her intention that the number of EHCPs are required is reduced? And will she consult widely before implementing any such changes? In yesterday's budget, the government did put up taxes by £42 billion, but actually one of the areas where they were honest with the electorate they would put up taxes was their 20% education tax. But we now have the OBR assessment, which is up to 37,000 pupils will leave or not enter the independent school sector as a result of this new tax. And many of them may be in independent schools, which offer specialist support for children. There are more than 100,000 children in specialist schools who do not have an EHCP. That is children whose parents have decided that that's the best place for their child to be educated. Yet in response to the technical note consultation, the government has refused to exempt them from this new tax, as it believes there must be a formal independent assessment that a child's needs cannot be met in the state sector. So I repeat a question I've asked before, as I don't think I've had an answer. How many extra EHCP applications the government expects local authorities will have to assess? To conclude, since the election, the Minister has said the Labour government is committed and wants to absolutely fix the SEND system. I know she means that, and we want to work with her to achieve that. And every honourable member wants to ensure that children and their families get the support that their child deserves to realise their potential. So the offer that we have is let's work together to improve the outcomes and give children the best start.
I call the Minister, Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you, Sir Mark. It's an honour to serve under you as Chair, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Basingstoke for securing this debate today on this incredibly important subject. And I know he, like everyone else here today has been supporting families in his constituency to navigate the SEND system, and also has raised this issue regularly in the House of Commons, particularly during oral questions. And he spoke incredibly passionately in his opening speech on behalf of his constituents, and I am sure it will be of huge comfort to them to have their voices heard in such a powerful way here in the chamber today, because improving the special educational needs and disability system across the country is a priority for this government. We want all children, regardless of where they are in the country, to get the right support to succeed in their education, but also to lead happy, healthy, productive adult lives. Because every child deserves the opportunity to achieve and thrive, but we know at the moment far from every child is getting that chance. And we know also that for far too long, families have been let down by a system that is not working. And as the Honourable Gentleman for Basingstoke highlighted, a report by the National Audit Office last week echoes this. The report found a system that has totally lost the confidence of families, that children with special educational needs and disabilities are being failed on every measure. The report also found that despite the high needs funding for children and young people with complex special educational needs and disabilities rising to higher and higher levels, the system is not delivering, and it is clearly in need of reform. The whole system needs reform. However, I want to give a sense of light at the end of the tunnel, because our promise to families is that we are completely committed to improving the SEND system and rebuilding that confidence that the education system will provide for every child. And I know there are families in the gallery today, and I'm glad they are here to hear this message. Last week, we published independently commissioned insights that showed that if the system was extensively improved, using early intervention and better resourcing in the mainstream schools, it could lead to tens of thousands of more children and young people having their needs met without an EHCP, having their needs met in a mainstream setting rather than in a specialist placement. But to do it, we do need to urgently improve the inclusivity and expertise in mainstream schools, while also ensuring that there are special schools that can cater to those with the most complex needs. And as my honourable friend, the member for Southampton Itchen, spoke about, this requires a holistic approach to reform, getting more teachers into our schools, creating a voice for support staff that we know are so crucial to supporting children with special educational needs and disabilities through the school support staff negotiating body that we will be bringing forward in legislation, improving training for support staff, for teachers, for leaders, to ensure that we have a curriculum and assessment system that truly serves every child and enables them to thrive with a broad and rich curriculum that gives them the opportunity to have a rich education, but also one that taps into their skills and talents as well. And of course, we need to look at Ofsted and how they are motivating the school system to be as inclusive as possible. We want to see all schools cooperating with their local authorities on admissions, strengthening the accountability of the mainstream system to be more inclusive through Ofsted, and supporting the mainstream workforce to have that SEND expertise. We want to see early intervention and identification improved and supported, and that's why, as the Shadow Minister referenced, we have announced the ongoing funded support for schools registered with the Nuffield Early Language Intervention Programme to continue, because it is so important that children get that speech and language intervention support at the earliest stage possible so that they can find their voice and we can identify challenges at the earliest stage possible. Improving the SEND system, as honourable members have highlighted, is absolutely vital to us fulfilling our opportunity mission to break that unfair link between background and opportunity, starting with giving every child with SEND, along with all children in our system, the best start in life. But it is huge, complex reform. There is no magic wand, there is no quick fix, and the government cannot do it alone. That's why we will work with the sector. It's essential that we work with valued partners to ensure that the approach is planned, is delivered, together with parents, with schools, with councils, with expert staff who we know already go above and beyond to support children. And we do continue to ask for patience, but we will work as fast as we can to make the changes that we know families are crying out for. Following the budget announcement yesterday, high needs funding will increase by almost £1 billion in 2025 to 26 compared to 2024 to 25, which brings the total high needs funding to £11.9 billion. The funding includes £90 million to increase the high needs element of the 2024-25 Core Schools Budget Grant to the full year equivalent, which will be incorporated with the other teachers' pay and pension grants for 2025-26 to make sure that they are fully funded. We're now in the process of calculating the high needs national funding formula, which will provide local authorities with their indicative allocations for 2025-26. We expect to publish this by the end of November. The structure of the high needs national funding formula remains largely unchanged in 2025-26 because we want to take time to consider what changes are needed, both to make sure that we establish a fair education funding system that directs funding to where it is needed and that it does support special educational needs and disability reforms and the reforms that we would like to see taken forward. This will take time, so we do ask for patience. And as the Honourable Member for Southampton Itchen also asked specifically about the statutory override, we recognise the unprecedented pressures that local authorities find themselves under. We're providing almost £1 billion more for high needs budgets in 2025-26. As I mentioned, the impact on individual local authorities' deficits will be variable, and the statutory override is a temporary accounting measure which separates out the local authorities' dedicated school grants deficits from their wider financial position so that they can manage their deficits. It remains important that every local authority continues to look at what it can do within the current system to manage their high needs budget while continuing to provide the support that children with special educational needs and disabilities need. And we are working to consider how we can help councils manage the impact of the dedicated school grant deficits on their accounts within a SEND system that we know is in desperate need of longer-term reform. With reference to Hampshire specifically, Ofsted and the Care Quality Commission jointly inspect local area SEND provision to ensure there is a joint approach for children and young people. The inspections enable the department to intervene in cases of significant concern and to work with local areas and professional advisors to try and address where there may be weaknesses that have been identified. The last joint local SEND inspection in Hampshire took place in March 2020. Inspectors visited a range of providers, spoke to leaders, staff and governors to determine strengths and weaknesses in the local area's SEND provision. The inspection found at that time leaders in Hampshire were highly ambitious for children and young people with SEND, and while the inspection did identify areas of weakness, areas for improvement, it did not identify areas of significant weakness. But since that inspection, the Department for Education and NHS England have stayed in regular contact with Hampshire local special educational needs and disabilities officials to discuss the local area's strategic direction and to offer support where needed. And as the Honourable Member for Strangford made in his characteristically constructive contribution today, he rightly pointed out that there is a really significant need for the Department for Education and for our Department for Health to work closely together on this issue and to work at a local level on this issue. And Hampshire, I'll just finish my remark and then Hampshire will be inspected under the new area SEND inspection framework, which came into effect in 2023 in due course. I'll give way.
Minister, as you have very kindly in your reply have given us some hope for the way forward. Minister, one of the departments that I didn't include, and I should have said it in my earlier speech, apology for not doing so. I think it's important that perhaps maybe those parents are aware of all of the help in the system there is, for instance, in DWP, for example, and DLA. I always, whenever somebody comes to me with a child who has experienced some educational issues, I always point them to, are you aware that the system's set up there to help you? Is that something maybe we should be emphasised a wee bit more strongly?
I think the Honourable Gentleman raises an important point, and I think this should happen at the earliest point possible. We know, for example, and I've mentioned already, that children's earliest years make the biggest difference to their life chances, and that high-quality earlier education can lead to much better outcomes for all children. And there are arrangements in place to support early years to be able to access that early education. This includes a disability access funding, special educational needs inclusion funding, and if we can help children and families access some of this support at the earliest stage and be able to be supported to access any additional support that may be available to them, he's absolutely right to highlight that. And I think if we do it at the earliest stage in a child's life, then we will be able to improve children's outcomes and families' experiences. We really do want more children and young people to receive the support they need to thrive in their local mainstream setting, reducing the need for them to travel a long way to access that specialist placement. Many mainstream settings are going above and beyond to deliver specialist provision locally through resourced provision and special educational needs units. However, we know there will always be a place in the system for special schools and colleges for children and young people with the most complex needs. The department supports local authorities to provide those places for children and young people through annual high needs capital funding, and it can be used to deliver new places in mainstream and special schools as well as in specialist settings. And it can be used to improve the suitability and accessibility of existing buildings, and we will set out the plans for future high needs capital funding in due course. The government is absolutely committed to working with the council, school leaders and other sector partners nationally and in Hampshire to develop and improve inclusive education within the mainstream setting. The Honourable Member for North East Hampshire raised concerns about transport. No child should struggle to get to school because of a lack of transport. Local authorities are obliged to arrange free travel for children of compulsory school age who attend their nearest school and can't walk there because of the distance or because of a special educational need, disability or mobility problem, or because the route isn't safe. And there are additional rights to free travel for low-income households to help them exercise school choice. But we know how challenging home-to-school travel is for local authorities at the moment, and we know this is in large part due to the pressures on the SEND system itself. In our manifesto, we committed to improving inclusivity and expertise in mainstream schools, and that will mean fewer children having to travel those distances to a school that can meet their needs and reduce that pressure on home-to-school travel. But I am really keen to understand how well the school travel policy is working to support children to access educational opportunity, and I will continue to work with officials in the department and across government, because this is a cross-government challenge when it comes to transport, in order to improve the situation. So I was going to conclude and thank my honourable friend again for bringing this matter forward, for all who have contributed to the debate today. I will, if you give me 1 second. SEND outcomes in Hampshire and across the country is an issue we all care passionately about.
Again, Minister, thank you very much for a very comprehensive and helpful response. Minister, I mentioned in one of my contribution, I referred to a nurture class, a number of nurture classes in one of my schools, which seems to be able to bring a number of children with educational challenges together within a big school and be able to look after them. That's something that's coming from the education system in Northern Ireland, of course. And I know the Minister always, and I know she always does this, always makes contact with the Education Authority back home, because I did say earlier on, regionally we may have ideas which may be helpful elsewhere. Is that something that the Minister would do, perhaps? Thank you so much.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for that, and I will take it away, because I think where we have examples of good practice that can be used and rolled out and used in other settings, and we're absolutely open to ideas for how we can reform this system, because it is important that we don't just have pockets of where this works. We need it to work everywhere, and for us to have a reformed system across the board. And I will give way, and I was going to say as well, it's good that he intervened, because it reminded me I haven't answered a couple of your questions, which I will come to.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I just wanted to ask one question. You talked really eloquently about how the government intends to work with councils and providers and others on reform of the system. I just wanted to ask really how parents like mine, those in Basingstoke and in working with other members of Parliament, can inform and provide input into the future reform and review, because I think their experience and expertise will be incredibly useful in that process.
My honourable friend raises a very important point, and one that I think the honourable gentleman for North West Norfolk also raised, in that we are very clear that government cannot deliver any of this. It must be delivered with partners in the communities that are serving children, and it must be delivered in a way that is in partnership with the families that we know are crying out for this change. And we will be keen to consult and to engage, and that will have to be done on as localised a basis as possible to get the real flavour of challenges that I know. There are many common themes across the country, but there will be particular issues in particular areas that will also need to be addressed. So he raised an important point, and I will take that away with me. In relation to the questions that were raised about education, health and care plans, figures released by the Department in September do show very clearly that children with special educational needs and disabilities are not having their needs addressed and are waiting far too long for the system that is currently cricking at the seams. And without further action, it is just going to deteriorate further. That is clear. The growing number of families are needing support. So we know that local authorities have been affected by an increased demand for education, health and care plans and their workforce capacity to meet the demand. So a more efficient and effective service delivery alongside communication with schools and families is really central to how we improve this. We're investing £21 million to train 400 more educational psychologists from this year to support the capacity in local authority services, including delivering those statutory assessments. And we will work as quickly as possible to ensure there is more effective early identification, which I have mentioned, because it is so important that we provide training to early educators, that we identify and pick up on these challenges or that a child might be facing at the earliest point in their life. And we will continue to monitor and work closely with local authorities that have issues with their education, health and care plan timelines. Where we have concerns about a local authority's capacity to make the improvements, we will work with local authorities to identify the barriers, put in place effective recovery plans, and that includes securing specialist SEND advisor support to help identify those barriers to EHCP process timeliness and put in place plans for recovery. And in terms of the questions raised about private schools and the VAT change, private schools can provide choice, high-quality education, economic benefit and public benefit through partnerships. But most parents cannot choose private schools. We need to improve the provision for 93% of pupils at state-funded schools, and that is our focus. Parents that use private schools can pay to support this by paying the VAT that would apply to other optional services. Ending the tax breaks that private schools currently enjoy will raise revenue to improve public services, including through the provision of 6,500 new teachers to our state-funded schools. Children whose place at a private school has been commissioned by a local authority, for example, under an education, health and care plan, will not be affected by the VAT changes. I absolutely acknowledge the hardship that too many families face when seeking to secure the right support for their children with special educational needs and disabilities. I am determined that this will change. So I wanted to conclude by thanking all those working across the education, health and care systems in the interests of our children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, those working in Hampshire and those working right across the country. We absolutely need to deliver the very best for all of our children and young people, including children with special educational needs and disabilities. And on this, the government is absolutely determined to deliver.
I call Luke Murphy to wind up this debate.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you to all members who've contributed to the debate today. I just wanted to conclude by mentioning some of those remarks by my honourable colleagues. I thank the member for Strangford for particularly highlighting the issue around early intervention, something that many of the parents in my constituency have recognised, indeed the member for Redditch also for recognising the great campaigning work of the parents here today, but also in his constituency and across the country. The member for Southampton Itchin for highlighting the fundamental shift that is needed in inclusive practices in schools, also highlighting the issues around teacher training and the fundamental importance of resourcing a reformed system. I'd like to thank the member for North East Hampshire as well for highlighting that, that really important quote around, and I think it was kind of echoed by many of the comments of the parents that I've spoken to around, this shouldn't be a fight against the system. This should be a system that should be there to provide the support. And I also recognise the transport challenges that she highlighted as well. I'd like to thank the member for North West Norfolk also for recognising many of the issues I highlighted in the speech around early intervention, training in mainstream schools and transport issues as well. Though I might gently suggest that given how devastating the NEO report was, maybe perhaps some acknowledgement that that was a kind of a summation of where the system had got to over the last 14 years. But I thank him nonetheless for his contribution and the nature in which this debate has been conducted in a cross-party manner. And I'd like to thank the Minister as well for recognising the challenges within the system and for the passion that I know in that she's committed to reforming the system and ensuring that it works for parents and children in Basingstoke and across the country as well. As others have said, this is my first Westminster Hall debate. I thank everyone for contributing. I'd like to thank the Chair and the House officials, the officials of the department who've contributed today, the Minister and all members who have contributed. I also wanted to thank all those teachers and others in the educational system in Basingstoke and beyond. I've had lots of conversations with primary school head teachers and secondary in my own constituency have talked about the challenges that they are facing, and I know that all of them struggle every day to do their very best to provide the opportunity for the kids that attend their schools, and it's a struggle that I know that we must help them with and ensure it's not a struggle for them or the parents or the kids, but actually a system that works to deliver for them. But most of all, I'd like to thank the families and parents who've raised this issue with me. I look forward to continuing to campaign with them to ensure, and working with the government and colleagues across the House, across party, to ensure that we do build a truly inclusive education system where every child has the opportunity to succeed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered SEND provision in Hampshire. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. This sitting is suspended until 3 p.m. Thank you all.